Greetings, dear Earth family. Welcome to Ascension Stories. Today we have Mira, and she is a wellness coach. Welcome, Mira.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you so much for being here. I needed to have you on. You are absolutely fantastic. The work that you do, the content that you release, it's absolutely amazing. So usually the way I start this, I like to ask people about their ascension journey, whatever it is that you want to share, however short, however long, it's up to you, whatever comes to mind.
Sure. So the Ascension journey has been an interesting one for me in that it's basically been just a total deconstruct and reconstruct process for me, including to the point where I've even now come to a awareness of, like, within these concepts of ascension, that we have these preconceived notions of hierarchy as belief systems that don't necessarily serve us even within the ascension process, which for me has been an understanding or learning that basically there's present self, and that present self's loving or unconditional observer awareness is what connects and transcends future and past self into whole being, basically. So that we're not only meant to ascend, that we're supposed to kind of be the bridge between higher and lower self, and that they are both meeting us in the middle, to integrate. So that would be what I would share that's been like the most epiphanous for me recently as far as ascension goes. Because again, we have this whole concept that, like, the higher the better, and I started realizing, well, you can't, like, you gotta have something that meets in the middle, basically. So even higher self has something to learn from perceived lower self, that it's just our human ego individuation programming that kind of gives us this idea that something that's higher or above us is literally better than us, or knows more than us, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say that's been the most interesting, and hopefully that opens a few people's eyes about, not just focusing on only moving into just pure unadulterated ascension, basically.
Yeah. You need to definitely be aware of the fact that neither is better or worse. The higher self, or even spirit, let's say God, I mean, is learning through these forms on this physical plane. It's nothing's higher, nothing's lower. These are just words. They're all part of the same thing. And we're actually doing the hard work. They're out there just like do. Yeah, sure, I'll guide you. Yeah, here's a sign. We're doing the really, like, I guess, heavy lifting over here. So we're the ones that, like, we're this plane was created to teach us. This is really important. We're doing really important work. So I mean, technically, if you want to do hierarchy, which I would not advise, we're actually even better. But no, kidding. No, but seriously, this is really important stuff. We are not to definitely not to, like, talk about that's better, this is worse. It's all the same worth. It's all necessary, so yeah. And I feel like people think that we need to transcend and kind of just, like, live in the like this euphoria, this 5D consciousness. They don't understand that 3D is very important as well. Like, we're incarnated here to be physical humans.
Yes.
Like this whole, like, oh, meat suit, like when the people say it in a derogatory way, just like, no, you're here for a reason. If spirit wanted to be spirit, it was state spirit. So, like, what is this rejection? No, definitely not. You have to anchor, you have to ground, you have to, both are important. And like you said, kind of meet halfway, or just kind of integrate would be a good word as well. Just kind of both very, very important. No, nothing needs to be discounted.
Yes. So there's a great saying, which is that the sum is always the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts,
Right.
which is basically, this transcendent self is an understanding that it is a simultaneous or synchronistic convergence of perceived past, present, and future self occurring as one organism or entity thinking process. And that's what makes it feel so much better or easier or lighter, that you have all of yourself instead of like just higher self, basically, but that, you know, you need that sort of trinity. And I've done a lot of work figuring out that that is basically what the trinity was always supposed to represent. Yes, exactly. That, you know, that we're supposed to learn that. But to your effect too, the other thing I'm kind of working with is this understanding that, you know, 5D is sort of architect level, and then 3D is dweller level. And it's really difficult to be the architect and the dweller simultaneously. So you kind of have to have these ebbs and flows of being individuation or self, and then stepping into that transcendent, more source related self when you need to change architecture, basically. So for me last night, I was in you know, ego individuation self, and saw the moment for, okay, this is where transcendent architect self gets to change something in my trajectory, gets to remold or reshape the pattern so that now I don't have to worry about it going forward. But I can't architect and dwell at the same time. I have to be able to sort of step in between both and have an appreciation for the whole process of it.
Right. Well, what would you if you had to give a word or label, I guess, to that middle part? For me, observer. Right.
1,000%. 1,000%. I had a conversation about this the other day too, where someone was like, that just sounds unfun. And I'm like, it's the most fun I've ever had. I am literally in a constant rapport or conversation with myself through creation and through other entities and beings, that like through everything, basically, that it becomes this energetic dialogue where you get to learn how powerful this is and how to apply it. But that, you know, it's pretty, we are sort of in this concept or state of really fast evolution and like kind of crazy neuroplasticity evolution that's happening on a biologic level, to the point where we have to take breaks from it. Like our biology is changing so that we can exist in that state in a way that feels unexhausting, but that existing in that state, you know, takes a lot of brain power right now based on how our biology works. So like it's changed all sorts of stuff for me, but you know, I have to look at it from that sense of, okay, I need to be mindful that it's really exhausting for my biology, for this physical vessel right now as it's evolving, and going through this process of neuroplasticity to exist in that state more consciously, but that you got to be willing to give yourself some time to like take a break and just be individuation, so that your brain can breathe, basically.
I agree. I make sure I give myself those periods as well. All right, just go. Just like you've been working, you've been elevating, and then just go and like just go.
Yes.
Just chill
It's a
out.
lot of work. It's not tangible work. It's not tangible work out here. And so people don't like, it's not something you can ever be affirmed in, other than meeting someone else who's doing it. And it's like, yes, I've experienced that exhaustion.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of transmutation and energetic work that's happening at a core internal level all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's days where I'm just like, yeah, no, today I don't have it in me to be positive. I'm just gonna melt. I'm just giving myself, because I'm usually go like with whatever it is that I'm doing, like little things, but these little things they do take on a lot of, or take a lot of energy. And it's just like, there's days I'm just like, everything on today's schedule, moving it over, you know, like next day, or scheduling it kind of throughout the week or whatever, just like can't deal. I need a break. But yeah, and I feel like over time, the more you're used to doing this work, the more you'll be able to kind of take it on, and the more your system's going to be able to deal with it, and less time that you need to kind of unplug, I guess would be a way to put it.
Yes.
A lot.
or replug, right? Like depending on the matrix
Right.
metaphor you use.
Well,
But it's an interesting process too, because we're basically learning how to, like, from a micro to macro perspective, it seems like we're finally on the micro learning how to most efficiently use this energetic system we've been given so that we can finally learn how to do that at the macro global earth and humanity level, because we've been really bad at that for a long time. And we know that we're not good at utilizing resources or energy in a way that's efficient or healthy for the planet, but we're at a micro level, we're not super good at doing it for ourselves either. So it's like, that's a large part of this process too, is just learning how to be more efficient with emotional energy, thought field energy, physical materia energy, and all the different types and forms of energy that can work together or that don't work together so well too, and like how to process them in a way that is the most efficient, the healthiest for us.
Yeah, for sure. So now I'll ask you this question. You don't have to share. If you don't want to, you could just say next or skip or whatever. So was there a moment where you kind of just like, holy shit, I need to change things over? Yeah, basically that's kind of the beginning of the path, right? But yeah.
Yes. So, the dark night of the soul is a real thing. I had to, this journey starts usually in a state of total isolation and a sense of total purposelessness. I was at a point where I was going to a job every day that represented everything that I stood against, that made me a completely mindfully incongruent person, that was, forcing me to exist, not forcing me, but, NPC self basically was existing in martyrdom programming, that was exhausting and seemed, without end. And that at a certain point, I kind of opened a door I didn't mean to open. So that was an interesting process. I don't know if you experienced that as well.
Tell me more.
Where it was like, I got my reflection of my projection got incredibly small the more isolated I became. And so it, like, the first step became, holy shit, it's all me. I have to take responsibility, and how much of a process that is for the ego, because it does not want to do that. But you realize very quickly that actually it does enjoy it, because with great power with great responsibility comes great power, basically. That now ego steps into this understanding of, oh, if I actually just allow self to express, I'm my most powerful. I'm the least amount of victim that I can be. So that was an interesting journey for me. But I also just kind of flung the door wide open on accident and fell into observance consciousness without having bridged it. It was like, what the fuck is going on? Because once if you start experiencing that strong reflection of your projection, and you haven't had any sort of understanding or awareness or teaching of what that, as above, so below is, it becomes this really paranoid, scary space where you're like, holy shit, are people watching me? Why is everything reflecting my thoughts? Like, what's going on? And so I had to deprogram a lot of fear-based things, or fear-based narratives that are put in us that are kind of the big brother mindset, where it was like, I would see so much synchronicity between, and that's what it is you're really genuinely just experiencing synchronicity. But once you see it, if you don't know what it is, it's like, how is this happening? What is going on? So that's an important step I would say to people too, is hold space for that, and let it be something that teaches you about existing programming or belief systems that are keeping you in that state, or making you want to return to just NPC ego individuation. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that it makes you too scared to keep going, basically. Keep going. Courage, there's no courage without fear, and courage is one of our most amazing human traits, aside from self-belief, which are pretty contingent things that exist within us. But if it feels scary, if the reflection feels small, learn from it, observe it, accept it, love it, keep moving.
Yeah.
You'll get there.
Yeah. So so the term NPC, we spoke about this a few days ago. You, me, and Brandon and Bo were left from the roundtable, and we're just shooting the shit basically. And I was like, listen, guys, I need to bring up this topic of NPCs. Like, what the fuck does it actually mean? Like, you know,
Yes.
because like I feel like not nobody, but I feel like a lot of people have their own opinion, and maybe they're also influenced from other people's opinions, whatever. Um, and I was like, it doesn't make sense. And what I had brought up was that I'm going to try to put it into good words. That how is it that some people are like for example, let's say a rock is part of the source, part of the universe, part of
Right.
God, has consciousness, and you're telling me there's people walking around that don't have consciousness. Like that's basically how it feels that people are expressing it, and I'm like, I don't understand. So I don't remember which one of you guys actually had brought it up. Maybe it was you. I don't remember who it was, but it basically, you guys kind of made it clear that it's just basically not being awake. That's really what it comes down to.
Well, maybe not necessarily. I think in some cases it's like there's ego individuation, and then there's what I see as NPCs are still an extremely important part of the co-creative process as an archetypal behavior pattern within a system for ego individuations to interface with. They're extremely necessary, basically, but that it's very similar to, you know, we kind of equated it to just being devoid of ego, that it's just materia that's a part of a larger like source expression that provides that environment for ego, but that there have to be some of those sort of ego devoid vessels for us to have that interaction. And we sort of talked about it being similar to concepts of hive mind or unity consciousness, even in birds, where, you know, starlings, for example, when they're in like a unified field mentally, move as one entity. They lose that sense. Each individual vessel within that collective becomes NPC like in that moment. But the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so it's actually not a negative. I think a lot of people perceive it as a negative, but what we're really saying is like, it's this working, it's a vessel that is a human biological form, or potentially a non-human biological form. I think a lot of animals exist in hive mind or unity consciousness, or are open to that field of existence, of expression of source, that, you know, it's actually extremely important. We need those sort of empty vessels to allow spirit, big source self, to express through them to ego individuations of in moments of necessary learning, basically. Yeah. So that I think most people hear the NPC thing and they're like, oh, that's so rude. Like you're basically calling a person not a person. And I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that this is a vessel of prima materia that is just a pure vessel for source expression in the right moment, which is pretty much what Christ consciousness is. It's this whole concept of, you know, we are, you know, for lack of a better word, we're the flute, and spirit is the wind that, you know, the air that blows through it that makes music all around us, but that you need both to be able to experience that. And that sometimes it's not just a flute, it's an orchestra, right? When you're listening to an orchestra, you hear the orchestra. You don't necessarily focus on each individual player within that musical composition, and yet it is the orchestra that makes it beautiful and, you know, most creative, its best self, basically. So hopefully that kind of like, I think we talked about that a lot, and I agree with you. I think a lot of people look at it as something that's like, if you see NPC like behavior, that what you're saying is like, oh, it's just like an empty avatar that's useless. And I'm like, no, it is an empty avatar, but that's what makes it extremely useful. That's what makes it most important, because source is going to show up most expressly, most truly, most purely through that vessel, that biological form, for ego individuation selves to actually grow and learn from it, and like be present and listen to it, or see what, like have an awareness of what's going on with it. Basically, I think it has a lot to teach us about awareness too, and letting that state exist.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've really noticed too is there's this concept between higher self and lower self where you have to be willing to be the fool to be the master. And so sometimes that means you have to have a willingness to exist in an NPC state or fool state for higher self, to make moves in 3D reality that your ego shame patterning normally would not let you make. And so you're acting in a fool-like or NPC-like state, because people would be like, what the fuck are you doing? But it's an extremely important thing for you, transcendently at a soul level, for you to do whatever it is, that thing that spirit or source is pushing you to do, that would make you be perceived as a fool, basically.
And for those that are listening, in case people have never heard the term NPC, non-player character, I'm sure most have, but if you haven't, that just for your information. I definitely can look back and say that until age, even though at 16 I did have an awakening, or first awakening, where I basically just the observer mode came on, and because I wasn't ready and I was so dense, it was really scary. But through that and many years after that, because I feel like literally it took another 10 years for me to kind of come online, like because I was kind of in a way egoless, and then I finally kind of, I guess, spirit stepped in. Like all of a sudden I started thinking for myself. Yeah, I was definitely a different person. But yeah, I was definitely a non-player character. I was plugged into.
Oh, same. I had crazy ego programming that was all about, like, I think we had very similar ones, which is probably why I feel such an intuitive connection to you. But I was definitely in the like emo punk kid, woe is me, dressed in all black, be the rock star rebel, which now I look back and I still love those things. Like I can still appreciate some of those songs, but I also am at a point in my journey where I realized what I was doing to myself. Like that whole concept of they know not what they do. I was constantly consuming content that was just a reflection of my internal state that just compounded it and made it worse.
Yep.
And made I was wallowing in my victimhood and basically just constantly consuming that reflectionary content from that projection that I was creating. And it made it like just worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where now I'm like, yeah, I can hear like an old song that I like, but I also know what the lyrics and the tone of the song are going to do to me. And so I make choice points now not to consume it, that I can still appreciate it. I can still love the artistry of it, but that I'm not going back to that state of ego individuation, because she was just constantly taking things in that didn't serve her, that made her life worse, that made her life feel like suffering, or like not enough, or like there was an enemy that had to be taken down, or an adversary I had to, go fight to feel affirmed and positive and constructive as a part of the creative process.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, thank God we're moved on.
I know 10 years feels like a long time, but honestly, in the bigger picture scheme of things, 10 years is like a millisecond to creation. So
yeah, if that, right? It's just like blink. Yeah, for sure.
The people I work with in session, I tell all the time too, like, we want like results like this. And I try to remind people, whether we're 3 months into sessions or 6 months into sessions, if you've broken through 20 or 30 years or 40 or 50 years, depending on who I'm working with, of programming, of ego individuation, like belief systems and programming in a 6 month period, like, give yourself credit. People don't give themselves enough credit on this journey either, for how much time we've existed in the other space or other mindset. Yeah. And that if you get through, like, so many have healed a lot in the last 2.5 years. And I'm like, holy crap, guys, you healed, 20, 30 years of experiential trauma in 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, whatever it is. Be proud of yourself. give yourself some credit. That's something that our ego individuations seem to have an obsession with, is that we have to be humble. And I'm like, no, we need to like bring this sense of self-loving pride back. If you ever look up the word humble, ironically, like you read the definition, you're like, wow, I don't want to be any of these things. These were all the things that I was as ego individuation that made me feel like I wasn't enough and like I didn't make a difference. And, you know, all of the things that go along with basically the self-effacement of what being humble is.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I feel you. Yeah, I'm, you know, I do hear people talk about, you know, pride is bad. And I'm like, yeah, it depends on how far you take it, but that's really applies to anything in the world. How far do you take anything? Anything at all? Too much.
There's a spectrum to them all, right? There has to be. So there's like egocentric pride, that's arrogant pride, that's reactionary pride, that's the kind that gets you in a place mentally that, you know, you're offended by everything. And then there's loving pride, which people have no problem using that sense of pride with like their children,
Right.
or their family members or friends. But when it comes to self, there's like this preconceived notion that it's wrong for you to look at something you've done and feel a sense of pride over it. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, if you're at a soccer game with your kid and you score a goal, or that they score a goal, you're really proud of them and you're okay with it, right? But we never do that version of pride for ourselves. Oh, yeah, so it's like that's a super important part of this process too.
Good job. Like life is hard. It's okay to be like, hey, I really appreciate you. You did really fucking proud of you. God. Yes. Good job.
I say it to myself in the mirror all the time. I think people need to speak to themselves more too. You know, that's an awareness exercise that I give almost everyone when I start working with them, just to build that initial rapport or awareness of like what's going on up here, because most people are hearing it but they're not listening to it, right? So mirror work, like the thing I always tell people is, all right, let's just start with a simple exercise. Every time you look in the mirror, have a pause perspective and actually listen to what's being said. If the first thing that happens up here is something that is like telling you you're not good enough as you are, or is unkind, it's time to change the narrative, but that you have to like get present enough to hear that dialogue or that narrative running, to be willing to reprogram it or sort of deconstruct it away, so that the first thing you think when you look in the mirror is something like, I love you, or I'm proud of you, or like, we got this, you know, whatever it is, that voice that is supposed to be there to support you, instead of the one that is telling you you got to change something, or, you know, put on a better outfit, or, you know, don't go out today because you know you aren't looking pretty enough, or whatever it is for the average person, right? But just having that present awareness of just what you're even saying to yourself in your own mind when you look in your own reflection is something most people are like, huh, I've never done that. Well, you should probably listen, because there's a lot of voices that you're letting happen, right, that are co-creating your reality that really aren't your friend.
Yeah.
They're not serving you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about unity consciousness.
Oh, yeah. So here's the thing with unity consciousness. It's the best feeling in the world, but the ego is scared shitless of it. Because there's not a lot of space. There's no space for fear or shame or judgment of self within that unity consciousness or collective conscious level. Like, to be able to share a mind, you have to be willing to not be scared of what people are going to think about. Like, if you're already scared of your own thoughts, unity consciousness is not at the door for you right now, because you're already scared of what you're doing in here. You're not going to let anyone else in. But that version of self, which is basically just vessel for your full archetypal personas, like all of the archetypes that live inside of you, not just whatever zodiac you were born under, is the most intelligent, most efficient, truest, purest form of self. But you have to be willing to not let your ego stop self from intuitively expressing out of fear or shame or judgment of whatever other people are going to think. So we start learning it out here, then we learn it in here, and then we get to this place where we can have or experience like unity consciousness, Christ consciousness, or hive mind, all basically the same thing. But of course, you say hive mind, and people immediately are like, oh, that sounds scary. I don't want that. That sounds like a takeover. And I'm like, no, 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 I promise. I promise it's better. I promise it's the next evolutionary track for the human psyche and consciousness, and then it will behoove all of us. But that trust isn't quite there for a lot of people yet because they don't trust themselves. And so you got to get to a place of self-trust first so that you can trust all of self as it exists through the co-creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, as far as the ego goes, so my thought on that is, how some people are like, yeah, let's destroy the ego. We gotta, get rid of the ego. Here's my thought. I feel like the ego is important. I think the problem with ego is when the ego has wounds that it has not healed yet.
And ego should never be the master. That's the problem. If ego is the master and is vesseling and is captaining the vessel, the ship,
right,
you're not going to get very far because ego is scared to even leave port. They call for rain, and ego is like, we're not exploring today.
Yeah. Ego is weak. Ego is that little scared mouse, that's trying to pretend it's bigger than it is. Ego is definitely not a problem for those that keep hearing, kill your ego or something along those lines.
No. Integrate into self.
Integrate.
Ego has a lot to teach us. The biggest thing about ego is that usually it was learning how to use qualities or characteristics that are strengths for us, just in the wrong way.
Right.
Like a lot of women, for example, learn how to use that feminine archetypal strength to endure, to martyr, instead of learning how to exist in that strength as self, to do things like set boundaries, to have the strength to have an intuitive moment or conversation, to say the thing that your spirit is telling you to say, that ego is like, I don't know, people are going to not like you if you say that, right? So ego is definitely meant to be there. And again, I think we're in this sort of time frame right now where a lot of people are experiencing ego convergences through the timeline, and it's a choice point. It either shows up and you go, oh, I already did this work, fuck you, go away. Why are you here, right? And like, that's the choice point. You're choosing to not love the ego or shadow self. Or you can say, wow, you had to happen, and I love you for happening for me to be this me. What are the qualities or characteristics that I need to remember to love and appreciate about that ego individuation self that transcended and became higher self through the learning process? But like, we have to make that choice point, that even when we have those timeline convergences that feel denser, where we're like seeing all of those traumas from ego individuation, we get this choice to either love it and appreciate it or integrate it, or to like, screw you, ego, I don't want you, go away. Basically.
Gotta heal those wounds. Basically integration. It's all about integration. And so speaking of integration, something that I kind of wanted to bring up with you, so I feel like throughout however long throughout our existence, we've been going from the higher dimensions, let's say sources. I don't know how far the dimensions go, but let's just say that source is at the 12th dimension. I don't know how far the dimensions go. So the lower it goes throughout the dimensions, the more it separates, the more it fragments. And then here we are in the third dimension. We are super fragmented, super lost, super confused. And I feel like right now at this point in time is when and it's reminding me of the way the lungs take in breaths. So it goes expand, contract, expand, contract. So basically, we reached a point of, oh, okay, holy crap, we really like separated the fuck out of ourselves, fragmented the fuck out of ourselves, that at this point now we are like, okay, back to source. So now we are healing, therefore integrating, and going back towards let's say our more divine nature, or who we actually are.
Yes.
And I wanted to bring that up and hear what you have to say about that.
So I think that this has been a long time coming, basically, and that again, I work with belief systems with people a lot. So there is an overarching theme within, Orthodox scripture, basically, that is a subconscious belief system that's integrated into most of society, especially the Western world, which is that we're here to suffer.
Right.
And that divinity or God or creation is a singular individual entity or persona that exists above and outside of you. Instead of actually looking at scripture and having this rational realization of, well, literally every person in scripture that had a divine moment had it in here. And they may have had a projective reality that occurred that looked like it was happening out here, but that it all happened in here. So most of the faith-based, belief systems right now are being kind of deconstructed by people who understand I have to be part of creation. I have to be this, part of divinity. I have to be an important part of the cosmological process. Otherwise, why, this isn't the Wizard of Oz. God isn't sitting behind some curtain. I
was going to mention that earlier.
I think that God, though, did, just as we have, get an ego individuation. And I see this version of creator that's been utilized in most of Orthodox scripture as almost creation or the one eternal thing's ego individuation on earth. That even source needs to integrate and appreciate its ego or shadow that occurred through like the last 2,000 years of faith-based spirituality and belief systems for us all to transcend, but that we can do it on the micro as a collective, and that can heal even source, basically. But that, we have to be willing to really take a look at the belief systems we've accepted and whether or not, they're working for us, if they're getting us the desired results. That we were put here to learn how to be co-creators or part of an intentional part of, mindful part of the co-creative process, but that most of us are just sort of like letting ourselves be flailed around like with, flags in the wind and feeling victim to it instead of enjoying it and having fun. So I think a lot of this too is like people learning, there's this very serious tone that comes with some of this work, but at the same time, I'm always reminding people, you're also learning how to play again. I don't think whatever created everything was sitting there going like, I really want parts of myself to suffer. It wants to learn, but I don't think it ever wanted us to feel like we weren't a part of the whole, right? And the more parts of individuation or fragment that believe that they are separate from or disconnected from source, the more they really are, because belief shapes our collective reality. And that every time another part of individuation is lost to source becomes more aware of it losing its power even within creation. That all of us have to be willing to accept our important and vital role in it for even the greater eternal one thing to continue creating and loving itself. I look at how depressed humanity is, and I'm like, at a macro level, does that mean that creator is depressed? Is creator sad? Is creator feeling disconnected from self? Which is a totally different thing. But it's really appreciating that process, that you are a micro universe, and that the things you do with yourself have greater implications, not just for you, but for humanity as a whole, and even for creation, the creator, the one eternal thing that is perceiving itself through all things.
Yeah, for sure. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is dispelling the common misconception that people have about what it is like to live a spiritual life, what it's supposed to look like. I have a whole bunch of opinion on this. I actually have an episode on my first season of Greetings Earth Family. I think it's titled possibly How to Be Spiritual. in quotation marks, because it's just
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
it's just like, what are you guys, what's going on in the world with this? Like, to me, well, I'll tell you about what I feel like after you, because people are ridiculous. Like, apparently clothing is what makes, and saying namaste is what makes you fucking spiritual.
Yes. So to me, spirituality at its most base core level is about belief, intention, and the rituals we do for ourselves at a personal daily level to engage and enrich ourselves spiritually. So, for me, spirituality is, even at the end of the day, creating a ritual for how I end my day, right? I drink a certain cup of tea, or I burn a certain incense. I turn the computer off in a certain way and like leave the room a certain way. It's a ritualistic nature for me. Even moments like that, I think, are spiritual moments for us, because we're having this awareness of physical behavior in the physical world that we're doing to help instill or empower an intention or belief that is best for our internal well-being. So, most people only think of spirituality as like sitting in some temple, and like meditating, and, meditation is great. But even that, right? Like, I tell people all the time, I want you to start thinking about meditating, and they get all these excuses in their mind about like why they can't, because they don't have the right environment. Yeah. And I'm like, you can lay in your bed. I don't care. There's no right. You don't need to sit cross-legged with incense burning.
5 minutes.
Background.
5 minutes. Let's
do it in the shower. You can do it while you're driving, yes. Right? Like, people have this weird misconception of spirituality as this thing that is requiring of a collective rule book, right? Because that's kind of the narrative that's been given by a lot of structured religion, is that there has to be a rule book that you're ascribing to and following diligently for you to have a proper or correct spiritual experience, instead of the spiritual experience being about that intuitive inner journey, building that rapport with self internally so that you can experience the rapport with creation externally at some point. But that, spirituality can be simple. Belief systems can be simple. I tell people all the time, what's one of the most like detrimental belief systems someone can have? And it's literally a lack of self-belief. That's a spiritual belief system, but most people don't think of that. They're thinking about things from scripture, or, how a certain religious sect is going about it. And they're like, well, I just don't resonate with it. I'm like, well, then great. That's spiritual for you too. It didn't resonate. What does resonate with you? Even that process is a spiritual experience. We've created this formulaic world where, we've kind of removed spirituality from a lot of things because it's not easy to like data metric or analyze. And we're really at a loss for that. Like, I work with businesses too to help them understand that they are a spiritual entity or organism, even as a business, and that you have to be willing to have practices that treat you as a spiritual entity, whether as an individual persona or as an organization, that help people appreciate the process, feel connected to something, have a sense of purpose, right? Like, even establishing a sense of purpose is a spiritual experience. It's what makes you, it's what makes you you, and it's what makes you appreciate why you are you too. So I completely agree with you. There's this, and I think it's getting much better. People are starting to realize there's no right way to do spirituality, but that's sort of a part of even the spiritual journey too, is your ego individuation's hyper concern for being affirmed in whether or not your spiritual practices are right. Valid. And that your ego has to learn to let go of that desire for affirmation and just let the intuition be the wise woman inside of you that's guiding you through this process that's totally personal and individual to each of us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So for me, it's like you said, it's basically self-care. your healing journey is a spiritual practice. You drinking tea or drinking plenty of water is a spiritual practice. You making sure that you eat healthy and you don't take in things things that are toxic to your body. You know, for example, making sure you research that I don't know, a certain kind of pan doesn't have certain kind of chemicals or certain kind of metals that you could scrape off with your metal spatula, just random, you know, just like, because heavy metals are just extremely detrimental to your health in all the ways. Yeah, so taking care of yourself, having some kind of like, you matter, you're loved, I love you. Fuck everybody else. Like especially on the journey, like a lot of us end up kind of isolated, alone. Even before this whole thing happened, technically we could be in a room full of people that we know and be alone, you know, and you know, people are, you know, have their heads up their butts, you know, like so who's gonna care?
If you find yourself in that darkness, good for you.
Yes, it's good for you, because then you could like get up and start, like, you know, it's a wake-up call to take care of yourself. I love you. I care for, I got you. I got you.
Yeah. You have to experience a sense of isolation that makes you realize that all you have is yourself, so that you can appreciate that all there is self. That like the more you learn how to love and self-care in here, it's impossible for your projective reality not to reflect that, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's like the really powerful thing, is you start to realize like, oh crap, all I had to do was love myself and then everyone else will love me.
Yes, exactly.
That's easy.
You become whole, and all of a sudden you're reflecting other people into your life that are also whole. So now you don't have your head, no, they don't have their heads up their asses. They're present, they're aware, they're not hurting. They don't have this wounded ego that just fucks everything up. They're just this whole integrated person. You're just this whole integrated person, and now you could just run around and just have fun together and laugh and whatever, talk shit, you know, but you're coming from this place of wholeness, of I'm taken care of. I don't need anything from you. I mean, we do wonderful things and we share and we everything, but I don't need desperately anything from anybody, because I got me.
Right.
And so self-care, and the other one is living from the heart. That's it. That's spirituality. It's not about like you said, sitting in a temple or wearing hippie pants. Like I see people that are spiritual. I love using the fucking air quotes, because it's just, you know,
well, it's trendy right now too. So
oh,
there are a lot of people that are
NPC
spiritualists, if you will.
And you know, and I'm saying it right now, I'm only human. I do still get upset because of the spirituality to me is just such a heart-based thing. It's not, oh, I'm gonna sit like this, look at me, or take a picture of me, let me post it on my social media, look how spiritual I am. Because that's not what spirituality is. It's not. Yeah, it's just this, follow this, what feels right, what is your heart?
Exactly. And also just like I feel like people get so obsessed with finding the answers when the first step really needs to be learning how to ask yourself the right questions. Honestly, like that was the biggest part of my journey, is I was so concerned with finding answers, with knowing, until I finally understood that knowing is the enemy of understanding. It really is the enemy of wisdom, because you assume that this is what this is in perpetuity and this must be correct. You know, again, that exterior affirmation, whereas the heart-led life, the intuitive life, it gives you this like one state of wonder that you get to exist in. That's so important to the human process too. Even, you know, going on a walk is a spiritual experience.
Yes.
Going to the gym can be a spiritual experience. Absolutely. Sports are a spiritual experience. Like I invite people always to think about something that they're doing in their daily life and actually asking themselves, how can I assign a sense of spirituality to this? Knowing that every breath, movement, thought I make is a spiritual process that is being expressed through logical material form, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So next thing I wanted to talk about is, so I noticed at the end of your email, you had a lovely quote. And so it says, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then then I can change, by Carl Rogers. I love that quote. Yes. Yes. And
It was one of the most, the reason I use it is because it's one of the most profound quotes for me in my journey. But it was one of the quotes that as I was experiencing that paranoid, fearful state of the reflection, it came into my life in a very synchronistic moment that showed me I'm just fearing myself in others. Or, you know, to the example with Carl Jung, which is basically that everything that annoys us about or irritates us about others has something to teach us about ourselves. And that,
how annoying is that?
yeah, well, exactly. So I have to accept myself just as I am, just as I, you know, just as I project, to be willing to evolve, basically. And that, you know, that's basically where I was at with it, that I had to take these moments where I would experience self through another human being, and I would have to force myself to look at it that way. Okay, this is a reflection of self. What are the qualities right now about this person that are irritating me? And how can I accept that those are probably truths for me? And if I don't like the way that they feel when I'm experiencing them through my reflection, then I have the conscious responsibility. I have the power to change it in here, accept it as it is, as I experienced it, as it showed itself to me, accept it within self, then heal it and move forward with it so that my projective reality can become more positive, more loving. I'm not going to experience those irritating behaviors anymore because I have taken the conscious responsibility to accept them and evolve them or transmute them within myself first, instead of just feeling like annoyed by its presence, or even lacking an awareness of it. Most people lack the awareness, right? Like they get irritated by other people, and they, even you as, like, I don't know if you experience this, but I'm really good at observance of other people. I always have been my whole life. And I would see it in others all the time, where I would watch that back and forth projection happening in two people that couldn't stand each other. And I'm sitting there like, the core value, you guys are doing the same thing to each other and you're just not seeing it. You're not accepting the reality that you're facing yourself and you don't like it, so that you're going to have to change.
For sure. For sure. So I'm not sure if we exactly spoke about this. This is one of the things that I have written down, how to transcend the existing limiting perceptions and constructs of reality. Did we cover this? Not completely sure. I feel like yes or
Kind
no.
of. I think we touched on a lot. But you know, one of the things that I've realized is the hugest lesson we're here to learn about duality is to accept and love the paradoxes of duality. That we know, even at a scientific level, that there's equal and opposite reactions to everything. And that if we want to change that, right? If we want to transcend that, we have to do it here first. But that, you know, basically that's the goal, is to understand things like paradoxes in a way where they don't feel adversarial, right? Like the duality we live in is very obsessed with the adversarial arrangement, that my reflection is my enemy, and I must take it down, instead of learning how to see yourself in it, right? So ironically, this is like kind of where the root of the word Satan comes from, interestingly enough, which is that originally it was a Greco-Roman word used by philosophers and politicians, right, to describe an individual that opposed you. Now, opposing you, being your reflection, is a learning process. It's not supposed to be a fight. That's what I think we're like all kind of having to relearn too, is that when something opposes you, right, it's metaphorically very similar to how you need abrasion or something like sandpaper to polish a gem. Opposition is not your adversary. It's this abrasive force that you get to be very intentional with how you correlate with it, how you interact with it, so that you can luster yourself as the gem against the abrasion, instead of seeing it as your enemy that you need to get rid of, basically. I think that's one of the biggest things that we all have to learn, is to stop. Like, we all say we want peace, but we're obsessed with having, I call it hero syndrome. Like, we have to make a bad guy so that we can feel like a hero. But at a certain level of paradox and conscious responsibility, you have to be willing to sit there and go, it's selfish of me to want an enemy just so I can feel like a hero, because I know that I'm making something that doesn't need to exist, and that takes away from my peace, or takes away from my ability to enjoy the process and learn.
Right. Yeah. Something just popped into my head that kind of does not relate at all, but I just kind of want to throw this.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
I watched something a few days ago, this week or last week, talking about mass formation. Now, anybody that has not, did I send you this, by the way?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. Okay, so mass formation, it's like hypnosis, only, I guess, on a non-individual level. I am not in any way whatsoever very well versed in this at all. Like, I know hypnosis, but mass formation I do not know, except for what I just learned recently. So it's interesting. So what was brought to my attention was that so with hypnosis, like, if somebody is hypnotized, like, you could tell them, hurt this person or hurt me, they won't do it. It's just like this I guess morale, I don't know, like something within them just like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. But when it comes to mass formation, I guess something about it being a group, that you're losing your,
oh yeah, herd mind.
Yeah, you're losing your decency. I don't know, like, but
so it depends on the herd you choose to join, basically, right? That's the trick with this.
So and I forget, I forget, there's 4 things that are involved, or 4 conditions that are involved for the human psyche to, I guess, fall into this category or into this spell. So one is isolation, which pretty much everybody is isolated. The other one is lack of purpose, which, you go to work, there is no purpose, like, for the most part, people just don't feel like they have purpose. And there's 2 more that I presently do not remember. So basically it creates this condition where you have this free floating anxiety. And basically, people that know about this, because this is cyclical, this goes through humanity over and over and over again. So things like, what happened in Germany, what's happening now, the witch trials, like like burning humans.
Which, by the way, still to this day is the worst genocide that's ever happened, and it has never been given that credence, actually. Yes. Compared to other genocides.
There's towns apparently that ran out of women because they're all witches. So, like, there's a problem. There's always, in this 3D realm, there's always issues. So there's, so this mass formation is just like, oh, there's this issue. Oh, that's the enemy. Let's attack. So, like, again, with hypnosis, they won't hurt people, but mass formation, murder happens.
Yeah, so this is a large part of ego individuation programming that people have to transcend. That sort of programming is its own state of negative or controlling hypnosis. Whereas, like, for the Gnostics, it was this concept of gnosis, not necessarily hypnosis, but gnosis, which is the gnosis of the soul. That basically the only thing you're entranced by is self. And that's the thing that will lead you to your best expression, your best success, your purest form. But that's an internal gnosis that occurs, that's intentional, that is malleable, if you will, compared to, like, ego programming that a lot of us get. So the example this is nothing against our military members. I think that they're one of the most hypnotized, programmed individuals on the planet, sometimes in a very unhealthy way, which is that you have a soldier who will be out in the field who's been programmed to follow commands, which is kind of basically a form of, hypnosis. And they will see something that they know morally, intuitively, at a human level is incongruent to their belief systems and how they would act as an individual. But because of that command programming, they do it anyway. So that to me is like the negative form of hypnosis that's always existed, that we call programming basically, or conditioning, that people sort of are blissfully unaware of until they experience it. And it creates these really traumatic rifts and fractals and fragments in the soul structure, far more so than that internal gnosis, which actually helps you heal it, basically. But yeah, I totally agree with you that there's this choice point of which form of it you are engaging with. You're choosing the herd or the hive mind that you are aligned with, that you're resonant with, that your frequency is sort of in with. But then you also have this conscious responsibility to ask yourself how that herd mind is making you feel. If it's making you angry, if it's making you feel like you have an enemy, if it's making you feel like you have no one you can trust, if it's making you feel like you're a part of a system that's here to take something down, right?
Right. And that's
probably not the healthiest form of it to be in.
Yeah. So it's this whole thing where this isolation, this lack of purpose now translates into, oh, that's an enemy. We're all brothers now. We're brethren. We're all soldiers.
We want to blame the 1% in the government, but realistically, the 1% in the government is made up of individual ego personas that are programmed. So we gotta take the conscious responsibility. We gotta accept that it's just self existing in a format that doesn't feel good to us.
Yeah. So they attack the enemy. And in this case, like in today's case, there's different groups. There's, I'm gonna say the vaxxers, the anti-vaxxers, just as an example, like the vaxxers are like, oh, anti-vaxxers, they're the devil. Let's destroy. And then like the other side is whatever you want to call the other side, they're just like, oh, sheeple. While I understand the sheeple part, I get it. At the same time, like, do we need to
They're both existing on the ends of the spectrum of highly programmed individuals right now, if I'm being completely honest.
Yes.
Most of them ironically are staring at the other side and going, you don't think for yourself. Well, everything that irritates you about another has something to teach you about you, is basically what I would say to that. And interestingly enough, too, this kind of goes back to a concept of logos therapy, but there's this sort of Freudian concept of therapy that people who have mistrust for things like the government and for large corporate entities have a very deep paternal wound or mistrust wound. And so I work a lot with people in just getting into that mindset where you see the micro to macro reflections of that. So that if you're looking at something like, the government and going, I don't trust you, again, what does it have to teach you about yourself? You're experiencing that reflection because you don't trust you. So it doesn't mean you have to engage with it, but it's like a choice point of, okay, I don't like what I'm seeing through this lens. How do I change the lens instead of how do I try and change the thing that's on the other side of the lens?
Yeah. Like I don't trust the government either, but like it's not this whole major thing, whatever, skipping over that. So I wanted to say, like, they go from these individuals before they join this mass formation, they go from being so isolated to feeling like they're part of the formation, right? And then over time it just gets so messy, so chaotic, so distorted, so fucked up that at the end of it, down the road, they actually end up feeling even more isolated than what they started with. I just wanted to kind of finish that up.
So there's a lot of chaos energy present right now because of this extremely fast trajectory of psyche evolution that we're having as humanity. Here's the thing with chaos energy. You, as the individual form, are either creating with it or destroying with it. And if you're destroying with it, you're destroying self along with whatever else you're destroying. but that again, like there's this vilification of you in the concept of chaos energy as something that's like inherently bad, instead of seeing it as like resource material for us to take and intentionally remold with and move with. But if you're a person who's living in the sense that everything's done by others outside of you and you're a victim to reality, you're never going to engage with that sort of chaos energy in a way that feels constructive or positive for you, because you think it's not yours to touch. You think you're just supposed to exist in it instead of mold with it and move with it and flow with it and transmute it. I'm really happy you brought that up, honestly, because I think a lot of people are existing in that frame right now where they're like, everything's so chaotic right now and I don't know what to do. I'll wait for someone else to fix it for me. I'm like, why don't you engage with that chaotic energy? See what you can do with it. There's a lot of beautiful things that can be made from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like when things burn down, they create soil that has the nutrients to grow beautiful things. So yeah, creation comes out, or the phoenix comes out of chaos.
Yes.
First happening. Things need to fall to be reborn.
Yes.
So speaking of rebirth, I usually, if I remember, like to this time I wrote it down, this way I don't forget. I like to ask people that come on this podcast what New Earth is or means, or what they think New Earth is. Like what do you think?
To me, New Earth is a total shift in consciousness. I think that we're going to have a few steps that occur before we move back into a total sense of availability for unity consciousness, which is that I think right now we're kind of finding or aligning with our people, or the familial units that we would feel most comfortable starting in a smaller sense of unity consciousness with. So this would basically be like, family units moving toward having shared psychic fields, but not necessarily having a shared psychic field with the total collective, but that the goal is for us to like keep moving toward that, basically, where at a certain point we would just be spiritual individuation, self, right? Like there would still be individuation, there would still be self, but it wouldn't be so concerned with the particular suit in which we dwell, that we're going to be learning how to actually use consciousness as a medium for experience, and individuation within consciousness as a medium for experience, where we learn how to like share the space with each other. Maybe I'm not the only ego, maybe I'm not the only individuation self that can exist in this vessel. Maybe I can have 3 or 4 self present in vessel, and that we're kind of learning how to like experience consciousness in a totally different format, because we've been experiencing it one way for so long, and creation is kind of sitting here like, all right, time to do a new thing. I got to learn more things. We learned this, time to learn a new way to do it.
Wonderful. Love it. So the last thing I would like to ask is, what advice would you give to humanity? Like a really important piece, just like a kind of a leave off. Hey, do this.
Try to really start seeing everything as yourself. It's going to feel super performative at first. And it's mostly only going to be stuff that you can do with other individuation, humans. But that it becomes something where the more you do it, the more you look at someone, again, even when they're irritating you, and get really introspective and intuitive with asking questions like, okay, but how can I accept myself in this person that's in front of me and love it instead of disliking it? That's my biggest recommend, honestly, is just starting there. And also just starting with being like present. So many people are not present. They are constantly thinking about, stuck in, fearing things that have happened prior in experience, and projecting it into imaginative thought about the future, and like creating this vicious loop that is really only fixed or moved out of if you get really present, where you can see them both at the same time and make choice points from the present with it about how you want to move forward, how you want to evolve, basically. But that there's got to be a level of conscious responsibility that occurs for each of us.
Absolutely. So I guess the last thing I would ask is, what do you what offering do you bring to this world, or what do you do? How can people benefit from, I guess, what you do? Whatever comes to mind.
So basically, I have an awareness that I am a very strong reflection. I used to not have enough awareness of it to guide it or sort of mold it, if you will. So I actually went through a large portion of my life where people didn't really like me because I was just giving them purely themselves back. And it took a long time for me to realize that it was never me that people were like having difficulty with, it was themselves.
Same.
But now that I have an awareness of that, I sense when I'm sort of sharing the space, if you will, like especially in session, to the point where I can hear what self wants to say to self, but mold it in a way that is receivable to self. Like so many times we've been so disconnected from our spiritual self that honestly it's like angry at us, and you can't really blame it, but that communication doesn't necessarily go well when you first start this journey. And so that's where I kind of come in as a practitioner, is to help mold what your self wants to say to you in a way where you can receive it and appreciate it and actually make a positive, constructive change with it, instead of just feeling, self and ego feeling constantly angry at each other and never actually getting the work done, or receiving the information from one another because they just like don't want to accept it as it is.
Yeah. And how can people find you?
So the easiest way is my website, which is moonandrune.com. I also am on social media, so you can follow me on Instagram at Moon and Rune Wellness, or at NemoFawn is my personal account. I cross post a lot to both, but there are certain things that I only post to one or the other. And that if you do go to my website, I know that the way I do therapy is very different. I do integrative therapy because most of us either are having or need to be having a spiritually aware experience. And so I feel like it has to be a part of the therapeutic model as far as guidance goes. But that most people are unwilling to try it because they've experienced some form of very clinical, rational-based psychology therapy that was either ineffective for them or traumatic for them. So my first session, my initial consult session, is always free. I just want people to try it. It's a full session, but I just want people to try it and feel the difference and see what it feels like to have a wellness session that is mindful of that spiritual existence and how to better cultivate it and how to appreciate it and how to really start that inner journey in a way that feels safe, instead of, like you're falling down the rabbit hole, basically.
I love it. Yeah. So the problem with, in my opinion, with traditional therapy is that it's only concentrating on this and it's forgetting about this, because, this gets traumatized, so does this. So we can't just concentrate on this because there's still this that will project. So not only is this projecting, this is projecting. So definitely talking and feeling. So putting both into account. Integration.
Yeah, because this is actually the best healer as an organ in our entire body. We assign so much value to this. And this is an incredibly powerful thing, but the syncopation, the harmony of this and this is realistically the goal. Like that's the purest state of gnosis, is when these two are so in tune with each other that they're collaborating in every moment, as a force within you, instead of as individual organs or structures. Again, that whole concept of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, beautiful. Awesome. So I'm definitely going to put all your information down in the description notes and everything. And I want to say thank you so much for coming. I really love this conversation. You are a gift to the world. And yeah, thank you everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was wonderful. I loved every bit of this conversation, and look forward to a future where maybe we have a few more.
Absolutely. yeah, let's see what the world brings us. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.